So today, we're gonna be talking about this nice ceiling we have. Oh, shit. Oh. Actually, that's our ceiling. Wow. This is our ceiling. It is unique. We enjoyed the slatted look we saw all over the internet. Stop!
Okay, all right.
We enjoyed all of the slatted looks we saw. I can't get past 4 words.
Okay, I'll get tired.
We enjoyed all of the slatted looks we saw across the internet, but we didn't like how bulky they could be, and we also didn't want a white or black backdrop. So, we decided to make the job 10 times harder.
Now, in order for us to put together our ceiling, we first had to start with a template. Are you laughing?
Forewarning, the audio was not recording during the first portion of this video. I didn't realize my microphone was dead. So, we will be improvising.
Oh, look, I found this bee. I'm gonna save you, bee.
We first had to make our plywood layout. I started by taking measurements of the distances between each center point of our ceiling joists and the length that each of them ran widthwise in the van. We knew that our shower and our front standing closet were gonna have a different ceiling, so we omitted that from this layout.
Yeah.
We also wanted to get the most out of 3 sheets of sandy plywood to save on weight and costs, so we really needed the layout to be efficient. So I drew a rough sketch of our ceiling with each joist
On a piece of cardboard.
and started crunching some numbers to see what our layout options would be with those 3 sheets of plywood.
We ended up going with hamburger, right? Because
Hamburger, yes.
the width of the van is over 48 inches, which is the standard size. It's a 4-foot sheet of plywood. And we didn't want to have like little cuts on our sides.
Yeah.
So we set
Turned
them
'em.
this way in the van.
Perpendicular.
And it ended up being what? 4 different pieces.
Test, my pizza. 4 pizzas wrapped up in line is 3 pizzas backward. And then wash for 2 pizzas.
First, I cut them into like rough rectangular shapes, and then I would put them up on the ceiling and start working on scribing our rounded quarters and chopping off any excess. Yeah, it took roughly an hour.
And then I came out to a full cardboard ceiling template. So once we were confident in the overall shape and size of our template, we took them in segments and put them onto our sheets of 1/4-inch sandy plywood and traced them out. And the reason we went with 1/4-inch is because we saw all these other vans using like a thick 1/2-inch sheet of plywood, and then they'd use like a 3/4-inch furring strip as their slats. And that ends up taking up a large space, like 1 1/4 inches. And we already took up a decent amount of space with our heated floor system, so we wanted to try to save as much as we could by using a 1/4-inch backer with a 1/4-inch slat. We would only be taking a total of a 1/2 inch for our ceiling.
Plus, if it's thin, it has a little bit more flexibility, so maybe it can adapt to the contour of the van a little easier.
So if you see the ceiling here, it doesn't go flat, it goes boot. So we wanted to go with it. Now the whole process was pretty easy. We just took the cardboard, traced it out with a pencil, cut it out with a jigsaw,
I bit you. Ooh.
and then brought it in here piece by piece and saw if it fit. And a few of them were a little too big, so we had to scribe them and cut them down to size, but after about an hour, we had our pieces all set. Then it was on to painting.
Now, as far as the unique part of our design, we spent hours looking at different wall accents and just trying to get some inspiration from the interwebs. And ultimately, we landed on creating a painted mosaic with a retro vintage color palette. We also chose a nice creamy off-white that would serve as our backer, our base layer, and also the lines between our mosaic shapes. Once completed, we'd be running our slats about 3/4 apart, the full length of the ceiling.
Like you see here.
Like we did. See, we did it.
Now we quickly painted our backer with that off-white and then let it sit to cure. And then it was on to deciding on what material we wanted to use for the slats. We came across those cedar tongue and groove packs. They cover about 14 square feet and they run about like 25 to 30 bucks a pack, and they are 8 foot long and they're 1/4 inch thick. And our idea was to cut the tongues and grooves off to then have solid cedar planks that we would then glue up onto our ceiling. After toying a bit with the layout of those slats on our cutouts, we figured we would do 2 1/4 inch wide pieces and then leave 3/4 inch gaps between the two, so it was like segments of 3 inches. And it looked really good at the time, but it later came back to bite us in the ass, but we'll kind of get into that later on.
Aren't you hot in there? Well,
now, since our overall ceiling was around 14 feet in length, we needed to figure out where our slats would have a break because they only ran about 8 feet each. So around the center of our ceiling, we have a seam where 2 of our backers meet on a joist. And that's where we decided, okay, we're gonna have them break here. And then we staggered them. So we went flush to the seam, then we overhung the seam by 12 inches, and then on the next one, we overhung by 24. Then we just repeated that pattern for the rest of the ceiling. Once we had that decided, we cut everything to size and cut out the square openings for our fan and our air cooler here.
Then we sanded them all down and stained them with our color of choice, which was Ipswich Pine. And then we polyurethaned them to seal them up.
Yeah, we use the semi-gloss, and our whole poly process is probably incorrect. We've been struggling with it for all of our finishes. We brush it on, and then we sand it, and then we brush it on again, and then we sand it, and then we brushed on a 3rd coat, and it still had like some bubble marks and lines, but we had to kind of just roll with it. Now we are using the brush on twice method, you know, sand between coats, and we finish with a spray, which seems to work best for us so far. But if you guys have any suggestions on doing like a proper and clean poly finish, just leave it in the comments, and we'd really appreciate it because we've been jumping around with that and experimenting.
We're just not that good at it.
Finishes aren't our strong suit.
So while our planks were drying, we moved on to creating our mosaic pattern. We picked up some fancy painter's tape since we thought it'd be kind of cool to have our lines different sizes. We ended up using the 3/4 inch tape for the majority of them, and then the 1/2 inch for some of our smaller shapes. And we just freeformed the design. We started at one corner and just made a bunch of diagonals and different triangles and quadrilaterals.
And it was done.
It just worked.
And then we came back with the 1/2 inch tape. That was all 3/4. And then the 1/2 inch tape was for like smaller shapes within the big shapes.
Subdivision.
And then it just looked like a giant mosaic spider web. But once we had everything taped out, we wanted to make sure with the paints we chose, we weren't going to be putting them next to each other. The colors we went with were
yellow, green, purple, blue, pink.
But since we knew our colors, we labeled each triangle or shape with a letter that represented that color. So P for purple or G for green. And we went throughout the entire layout and made sure every space was a different color and they weren't touching each other. We didn't want to have like one big glob of green.
And then it was on to painting, which was pretty straightforward. We just painted the shape with the corresponding color, and we did 2 coats for the majority of the shapes, but some of the lighter colors, like the blue and yellow, needed a 3rd coat.
But it didn't take very long and everything was drying pretty quickly. And then it was time for pulling the tape. We were a bit nervous because when you tape things off, if you've ever done it before, sometimes lines will bleed. But to our surprise, when we did pull the tape, all of our lines were pretty clean. There were a few that we needed to touch up. For the most part, it turned out looking really like crisp. One thing we will point out, our initial color palette was a bit more muted. We wanted to have it like a retro color look to it, but when we painted it on this white backdrop, it really made it like brighten up.
Vibrant.
And it kind of looks like what you see at a like zoo exhibit
or, like
or
a children's
something.
learning center.
If we were to do this again, we would either have to choose like a more muted neutral backer color, like a gray or something, which wouldn't look good with what we were doing.
Or just duller colors.
Yeah,
in
way
general.
duller colors. So lesson
shades.
learned, but we rolled with it. So with everything prepped, it was time to put it all together. Now, we decided to do it in 2 large pieces. We took the 2 front sheets of backer plywood and put slats on them, and then we took the 2 back pieces of backer plywood and put slats on them so that when we went to install it, it wasn't putting in one giant ceiling because we're just 2 people. So we attached our slats using 1/2-inch pin nails and some adhesive. Now looking back at it, I would have preferred to use the marine grade adhesive, but I used what I had and I was kind of trying to save some money. And after using all these different types of adhesives, the only one that really seems to work in the van well is the marine grade adhesive, because it also allows for a little bit of flexibility. You know, this stuff, once it's there, if you move it or jostle it or turn it the wrong way, it kind of busts. So I would suggest if you glue anything in your van, just splurge and buy the $15 bottles, or just get like a giant contractor's pack of it or something, because you're gonna use a lot of it, most likely. So we took our pieces, we glued the backs of them, we placed them down, and then we used a 3/4 inch little spacer I cut out using the table saw to make sure that we had straight lines throughout the whole ceiling. And we just repeated that over and over and over. And after about an hour or something, we were done with the first segment, and then we moved on to the second, repeated it, and we had our slats set on our ceiling, right?
So the next step was to figure out where to place our ceiling lights and our ceiling outlet, which is where we ran into a bit of a problem. You remember how we said our slats were 2 1/4 inches wide, right? Well, our little ceiling lights require about a 2 1/8 inch hole, which means we'd really only have a 1/16 of an inch of wood on either side of the light, which presents a problem.
We managed to come up with a solution. So instead of using a 2 1/8 hole saw, right?
Yeah.
We ended up using a 2-inch hole saw, which gave us a little more meat. And then because they're like spring loaded lights, that's how they stay up. They needed a little extra front to back. So
more like an oval than a circle.
Yeah, so we used a Dremel along with like a little pencil grinder dealio and shaved it out so that it would fit. If you do this, maybe make sure your lights fit well within the slats, because when we did it the first time, I definitely ate away the edge of one of them. Luckily, you can't really see it. Anyway, we figured out where we wanted all of our lights placed by taking some measurements and figuring out what like fit
the most aesthetically pleasing design.
Yes.
Because we don't have like an even number of lights. It's not 2, 2, 2, 2.
And we've got a cabinet on this side, but no cabinet on this side. So we had to figure out the best way, you know, to have the greatest feng shui. But with that, our ceiling was done, you know, like we didn't. Right. Oh, and we also trimmed the sides. We trimmed the sides up and fixed that up a bit. Now, in order to attach our ceiling to the roof, or I guess the ceiling of our van, we needed to install furring strips. And we've seen people do this in a multitude of ways, and I don't think the way we did it was necessarily the easiest or best, but I'll explain why we chose the way we did. Now, the Sprinters have 12, I think.
Joist ribs.
Joists. So you're gonna see them, and they've got their own like factory holes in them. The ones that are in the centers are pretty simple. You just take a piece of wood or whatever you plan on using for your furring strip and attach it to it so that you have something to screw or glue into. We ended up using the furring strips you find at your local hardware store that are like 2.5 by 8 foot long and 3/4 inch thick. But we went with 3/4 because I thought, oh, I need that much meat to screw into to hold our ceiling in. But looking back at it, we probably could have got away with 1/2 inch, which would have been a lot easier because the van, like we said, bends. And getting a thick piece of 3/4 to bend that way was a pain in the butt. And the way we attached it was with some self-tappers that had very large heads on them. So we had to then use a Forstner bit to widen the holes out so it would sit flush and we can put the ceiling flush without having these like screw heads making bumps in the ceiling. And then we glued it all using marine grade adhesive, but before we attached everything, we waterproofed it using this bare waterproofing we have that we don't like. We have now switched to a Kills waterproofing, which a lot of people recommended, and it is a lot better. We used it for our walls, furring strips, and we also changed our self-tapping screws. We went to these like 1 7/16 ones. Now we've also seen people use the rib nuts, which is great. It has a way stronger bond. It's just more expensive and it's a lot more time consuming. So it's your call, you know, if you feel like that's the best route, go for it. It is probably a better method. It's just more time, more money, and we were happy with the glue and the self-tappers. So we got those up there after some time, and again, the centers were super easy, but the front and back we had to kind of make our own because we mounted them to the sides. Okay, so we set a little guy here. I think it's only 2 inches, might be 1.5 inches piece. And then we tried to make it so that our ceiling is gonna butt up against this. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And Julie is on our back. And that was a nightmare. What are you doing? What are you looking for? The back is not, like, we had to find the level using a level so that the ceiling wasn't gonna go like doof toward the back. And then every time I drilled, I would just suck up. I have black wool. I just eat it up. And now our hands and legs are covered in
goose
marine adhesive. But it's up. We've got all of our mounting points. So what time is it?
Approximately 4 p.m.
Yeah, it's 4:06. But
See?
it's also time to start putting the ceiling in.
And I think just one thing to note is that we had to pre-plan where we wanted to put our self-tappers because of all the factory holes that are already in the joist, and there are a lot.
Which are great for the rib nuts because you could just find the proper size and squeeze them right in. You don't have to drill any extra holes, which avoids any like rust or spray painting.
Right, for the self-tappers.
Yeah. It's a pain with the self-tappers.
We're ready to put the ceiling up. We ended up picking up some ceiling jacks, like the kind that people use to install drywall. We went ahead and got our adhesive up on the furring strips, carried the ceiling into place, and then started popping some screws into the furring strips.
Yeah, it took a little bit of maneuvering to get it in the right spot and then make sure it was like square on our middle furring strip because it had to be perfect to meet up with our second piece.
Second half.
But once we did, the jack stands really helped. And we just used 1 inch like multi-purpose screws because they're coated and they have like a T15 head, which is really nice because they don't strip out. So every crack, we're setting a screw, which we're gonna have to come back through and kind of clean up every edge, and we're gonna paint them. Try to make them part of the ceiling. Okay, so we're on to our second piece here. It took a while. We had to do a couple touch-ups. And this one's gonna be difficult. This one's gonna be a hard one because we've got to get it up here and then we got to attach all the joists that are overlapping our back piece, and it's fragile, super fragile.
Again, we glued the furring strips and the back of those overhanging slats, carried it, popped it up into place, jacked it up, and started popping screws. And once we got enough screws in, we went ahead and moved right to popping some pin nails in those overhanging slats so that they had some extra support.
It took us forever putting screws in every little crack and crevice.
Oh yeah, my arms were tired.
Until we had a solid bond to the ceiling joists, and then that was it. It was up. That's a serious shoulder workout.
Okay, she held up. Look at her.
I think overall it looks pretty good. I was worried about the color, but again, we're making it work. We're like tying it into our kitchenette now, which looks good. We've tied it into our flares, which are going in today. And I think it's gonna pan out to look pretty cool. Like it's giving us a reason to add more colors to the van.
Yeah, and it's something that no one else has done quite like it.
We don't think. I'm sure someone.
Pretty custom.
So we have had our ceiling up for about 2 months now. For the most part, it's all been pretty good. The only spots we're seeing a little bit of popping here is right where we have this bend, which we're just gonna have to glue it and pin it again there. And we still have plenty of standing room. We've added our 1/2 inch flooring. So we are now at 72.5. So that's like 6'1.5". So if you're over 6 feet, be a tight fit. You'd be bending your head. But for us, we're not worried about it. We're happy with the amount of room we've got. And that's it. Thanks for watching. This was our first video back since, well, this was our first tutorial video type of deal back since Julie's incident. And I think she did pretty good. She's gone and had a few tests done to see if she needs any like therapies and
physical therapy and like occupational therapy and all of that stuff. They ran some cognitive tests because I seem to be mixing some words up and like fumbling my words a lot, which is pretty common after a brain injury. One of the cognitive tests that I failed, I'll give it to you right now. Okay, so I'm gonna give you 60 seconds to list as many words as you can that start with a specific letter.
You guys ready?
So if I say letter R, you say rabbit, run, rug, right? See, I'm really good at it. Okay, so 60 seconds on the clock and F.
Let us know how you did in the comments.
Okay, well, respond to your comments with a pass fail rate.
Yeah, we'll just say pass or fail.
Because I failed it.
All right, guys. We just want to say thanks for hanging around, coming back, and watching the video. And to all the new Patreon supporters and all the current Patreon supporters and everyone who even came on and like gave us little donations and things like that. We definitely weren't seeking that.
It means a lot.
But it was very kind. You know, we do appreciate it. It's very helpful to us. And we hope you guys stay around. And if any newcomers are here, click the subscribe button.
He's got it too. It's contagious.
And follow along on our channel. And we will see you in the next video. Maybe we'll be explaining the flares here. Hopefully they're going to be done because it's been too long. Okay.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Show us your injuries.
That was for me doing my roll. See this cool dinosaur bump I've grown? That was for me doing that roll for the intro. Trying to do my handstand. Yeah, it's a knot. It's a knot. Look at. Pretty cool. Man, I'm just aging so well.